Welcome everybody back, and it's great to have for the Sir John Burnett Memorial Lecture, Sir Charles Burrell of the Knepp Castle Estate. I expect many attendees like myself have a visit to the Knepp Estate on their bucket list of places to visit. 3,200 acres of West Sussex Knepp Estate devoted to a process-led rewilding project. The talk is going to be new habitats for a connected naturescape, and Charlie will talk about how rewilding might be part of the solution in making space for nature in lowland Britain, and talking about the free roaming herds of cattle, horse, pigs and deer as drivers of habitat creation. Just before I hand over, though, I just wanted to point out that one of our very own NBN trustees, Andrew Wood, gets a mention in your wife Isabella Tree's excellent book about wilding, about the inspirational story of Knepp Wildland Project. And the reference relates to funding received from DEFRA's Environmental Stewardship Scheme, which Andrew had been instrumental in both creating and in approving for the Knepp Estate. And according to your wife's book, she writes that once the grant monies were received, Charlie was like a greyhound out of the slips. So thank you, Andrew, for creating that opportunity. And let me let the greyhound out of the slips again. Handing over to you, Sir Charles Burrell. Thank you very much.
Neil, thank you so much. That's all working, as I'm assuming. Andrew was completely instrumental in the whole beginning of our story. So yes, I mean, I tried to make contact with Andrew some years ago and try to get him to come and have a look at what he'd created. But Andrew had moved on from Natural England, and then we did actually make contact, but we never got to see each other. Anyway, I look forward to that at some stage. I'm just going to share a screen. Let's see if we can. Neil, does that look like there's a couple of cows in your screen?
Yes, there are. Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Okay.
We've got a few of your We've got a few of your Word documents on the side and things like that.
Brilliant.
Can you select to show screen, to show the slides full slide view? Because we're seeing your computer screen at the moment as well.
Ah, okay. Hold on. Screen 2. Is that this? Can you see my cursor?
That's it. Perfect.
Okay. I got the wrong screen. I got two screens, multiple screen in my office. I'm so honoured to give this talk, and I didn't know Sir John. I know the present Sir John, but the post Sir John I didn't know. But I hear I rang up a few people to find out what he was like, and here he was a rather extraordinary man. I'm going to give a talk a little bit about Knepp, just to set the scene, so that we can think about one form of natural process-led type of conservation with grazing animals as the sort of heart of it. I'll talk a little bit about the findings from what we've learned, and then I'm going to try to place it, really thinking. I'm trying to put my head on as Sir John Lawton's head, and start to think about how to reconnect landscapes, and how it's going to fit into how this idea is going to be part of the solution for future landscapes, and how we're going to bring back life. Anyway, I'm going to kick off with just where we are. So Knepp is West Sussex down here, and it's a 3,500 acre estate. And it's split into 3 different areas, and I'm going to talk about those 3 different areas later. We've also got an area outside of the rewilding project, which is about to go into a regenerative agricultural farming program, and Russ Carrington is going to be joining us to run that whole thing. Just to start with a little bit of history, this is my father and his 2 sisters and my uncle. And they are witnessing the ripping out of a whole lot of scrub that had grown up on the Knepp Estate. This is the agriculture depression between the wars. This is post Second World War, and Knepp was covered in scrub. It's that sort of land. It's 320 meters of clay cap over a bedrock of limestone and ironstone. It's tiny little fields. It's grade 3, grade 4 agricultural land. During the war, the Canadian Army was based in the castle in the middle of this estate. And you can see there's a wheat crop, looking actually quite fine wheat crop. And that wheat crop is being grown in a Repton listed park. And that was the beginning of the huge change, the dig for victory, the huge changes that we've seen in agriculture. I had spent I'm really quite dyslexic and rather hopeless at passing exams and things, but I did have a great time, 3 years at Cirencester, doing basic agriculture and then advanced farm management. And I adored my time there, and I learned a lot, and I thought I knew quite a lot by the time I came out of that whole educational system. And I took over Knepp, and for 17 years, I was in charge of the farm and the estate. My grandparents died when I was quite young, so I was taking over from them. My father had decided to stay in Australia. Just showing you a quick graph here. There's a big difference between the blue line and the green line. And the green line is the average wheat, winter wheat yields for England, and the UK. And this is the blue line is the average wheat yields for Knepp. And you can see that we were about 2 ton light a hectare by the end of the 90s. And that is a huge difference, a huge margin. If you're trying to sell commodities on the world market and you're 2 ton light, then you've got real problems. We were also big milk producers, so we were producing a lot of milk. And this is a graph showing in pounds how the milk price was going up, and then suddenly it collapsed. And so we were looking at a future in the dairy industry where our milk quota was going to disappear in value, our cow value was going to disappear. I wasn't at all sure what was going to happen to the dairy industry, and we needed to invest heavily in the dairies because we had got to a stage in our cycle where there was a whole lot of capital needed to be spent. During this whole period, this sort of mid-90s, the end of the 90s, I was searching for other alternative land uses for Knepp. And as my interest was always in insects and life, mostly in places like Africa and Australia, I was really quite interested in what we could do for nature. I happened to come across in the mid-90s Franz Vera, and Ted Green and Jill Butler took me over to Holland to meet Franz Vera. And we got on really well. And we then had several different meetings where we met up either in the Osvaardersplassen or in other places in Holland, or he came over here. And we got to talking about how we could do something at Knepp. Luckily, my children's trustee, Julian Smith, was happy to help in any mad schemes that I was coming up with. What we decided to do was ring fence the land with a deer fence, and we would put in a whole lot of drivers. Now, Vera describes them as drivers. These are things that we're going to create new habitats for the future. It wasn't looking back in the past and thinking about how to restore anything. It was looking at how could we create new habitats in a modern farming, conventionally farmed farm, and be good at getting stuff to come back. So we decided that we were going to go with a Tamworth pig, a proxy for the wild boar. This has given us, this is a keystone species, as you're all aware, but it's given us an extraordinary opportunity to see what happens with this animal, this missing, if you think of it as a wild boar, missing species from our landscape. We think it's given us the only growing population of turtle doves. It's given us purple emperor butterflies, the largest population in the UK. It's given us space for the annual and biannual plants that wouldn't really be able to compete with grasses and swards. So a real keystone species. Then we got the heavy hitters, and we've got about 700 of these, so we've got a lot of them. Fallow deer and red deer. The heavy hitters in that they are the big browsers, the things that are going to fight against vegetation succession and the animal, beating back that vegetation succession, because we didn't want this land to revert to a closed canopy woodland. We want to see if we could come up with a habitat that was really quite diverse and structurally very diverse. Then you've got the Exmoor ponies. Now the Exmoor pony, single stomach, teeth on the top, all these animals have different traits, we think, that are giving us different outcomes in this landscape. So Exmoor ponies, they're known to herd differently. They have different stomachs, and they transport nutrients and seeds around the site differently. They even have different viruses that they can carry effectively on their mouthpieces. Old English Longhorns. Well, we chose these as the proxy for the auroch, the lost auroch. And this was, it's a multiple stomached animal. It's got no teeth on the front of its mouth, so it eats differently. This is an old breed, so it's going to probably do quite well in our system, and that's certainly been proved to be right. They are browsers as well as graziers, and they have known to be up to 230. I saw one paper in Hungary, 230 different species of plant carried on their fur and their hooves in their stomach. So extraordinary animal in terms of moving stuff around as well as nutrients and so on. Knepp started like this. This is a lake in the middle of a hammer pond that I actually rebuilt about 30 years ago, and this is taken probably the end of the 90s and Google Earth picture, and what we did is we went from arable to this very complex structure of plants. Now that was done with these animals present only at the last tail end of allowing the vegetation to happen, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. The northern block is up here, and that's a ring fence around here. Incidentally, we removed about 115 kilometers of internal fences from the whole area. The northern block has just got cattle in it. The middle block has got horses, cattle, and deer, fallow and red. And the southern block has got all the species in it. And they're all ring fenced separately, but there is a conduit that goes between the southern block and the middle block, and things like deer can get through it. The southern block is what I'm going to talk about first, 450 hectares. I hope you can see this video, but it's quite a complex scene now, and it has changed so dramatically. But what we did was we allowed plants to come up in stubble, but we didn't come out of arable farming all in one big lump. We took about 6 years, from 2000 to 2006. We came out slowly. And that has meant that each field has got a feel to it. A different plant assemblage has formed in each field. Now, there's loads of different things that can affect that. Obviously, you can the weather of the year that you abandoned the land, the crops that you were having in beforehand, and so on. But there is a definite feeling that there's a unique plant assemblages within each field and each parcel. Then you've got the middle block, and this is the cultural landscape. This is where the Repton Park comes in. And what we were being paid for by government was a Repton Park restoration program. So there are trees and tree guards. There are these grazing and browsing animals. We're about to go into a period where we're going to reduce deer numbers to about 20 or 30 from about 450 animals. So we're going to go in for 10 years of just a huge reduction in deer numbers, and see if we can encourage some of the scrub to come back in this grassland. We're also going to increase the area that we're going to have in this area. So we're going to another 50 hectares are going to go into it. And then you've got the northern block. This bit of footage was taken a couple of years ago in the dry summer. I didn't do anything this summer. It was the driest summer ever this summer. But anyway, it was a dry summer. It's got about 120, 130 longhorn cattle in this area. And it was all reseeded with grasses, and that meant that all the exuberant scrub explosion that we had in the southern block just didn't happen. There is scrub coming through, and the hedges have grown out, but there is the grasses have suppressed the whole explosion in vegetation. On the surveying and monitoring, we have got now life pouring back in. And each area has different traits and different things that like it. And the most extraordinary bit, I suppose, is the arable reversion scrubland in the southern block, where most life seems to have poured back in. We have had an incredible group of people that have been monitoring all of this for 20 years almost. And the team is run by Penny Green, and she's been extraordinary. She's a full-time employee of Knepp, and she keeps this extraordinary band of sometimes volunteers, sometimes paid surveys and recording. But an incredible team have added to this whole story. Just a few little snippets of some of the things that we've been doing. This was last year's ringing by Penny and Tony Davis. And the really headline there was they caught in, I think it was 2.5 weeks, they caught 623 blackcaps, an astonishing number of blackcaps. The other thing that keeps on happening, everyone says, well, what's happened this year? Is there something new? And every year, perhaps because we're looking, we've got a lot of people interested to look, but every year we come up with new things. And this year it was this particular delightful looking fly, new to Britain. But the excitement for me is really palpable. Every year there's something happens, whether it's the goshawks turning up or the black stork or whatever it is, there's something new that always happens. This is Tony in the middle here, and he's talking to a whole lot of tourists. One of our businesses that has come off the back of this is tourism. And Laurie Jackson, Dave Green, and Penny Green are the ringers in our team. But I just wanted to sort of highlight this one thing. Tony Davis has been ringing birds for 30 years. And the blackcaps and the lesser whitethroats, he on Knepp, in 2 fields, he ringed more of those 2 species than an entire career, adding up his entire career as catches. So migratory birds are incredible, but also the breeding birds. And in 2018, we haven't still got the final data yet, but Tony's working on it. This is the southern block, 164 whitethroat territories. And Tony is working, and you can see how amazingly spaced they are. And one of the comments that was coming through from the team that was doing the survey work was they didn't think there was going to be many places that would have a higher density of breeding songbirds in lowland Britain. And that's the sort of thing that is just, music, first of all, to my ears in the spring, but it's a remarkable thing for me. Soil. Well, we've had a study done under Jim Harris, and Laura went out and did a whole lot of work on soils. Soil carbon at Knepp has more than doubled. Organic carbon has more than doubled. Soil organic matter more than doubled. I know this is quite complex, isn't it, soil? So these are sort of headlines, and there's obviously a lot of noise within this survey, but it was certainly very exciting to see it. And fungal biomarkers more than tripled. The ratio between fungal bacteria ratio had sort of recovered to a 50-50 type scenario. So our soils, which on the face of it, this is wheeled clay. It's terrible looking stuff, and you can see that here's a bit of soil in a plantation, and here's a bit of soil, a bit of scrubland and permanent pasture and so on, and they all look very, very different, but they all look pretty dreadful. One of the other I love dung beetles, and Sarah Brompton did a study in 2018. And she went out in July and she caught 12,000 dung beetles. And what she was looking at was the difference between our site and 2 organic farms just up the road. So the organic farms had animals, but they weren't. They were the animals were being wintered in houses and not let out all year round. So there was a difference there. But they caught 11,677 beetles on Knepp compared to the 518 on the 2 sites, the organic sites. The other thing we found was there was huge diversity in species in the Knepp model. The fact that you have fox, badger, deer, horse, pig, cattle, all makes a difference to the biodiversity of and in woodland, having dung in woodland really had a whole group of other dung beetles that won't come out into the open also appear. I want to just talk about how this all fits in to maybe the bigger picture. And this is a picture that I grabbed off the internet, and I can't find it again, so I have no idea where it is. I think people think it's probably Shropshire, but I have no idea. But what I want to just explore was what this landscape meant to me now that I have a little bit more knowledge about this whole subject. And this whole thing of having a canalised river and a dual carriageway, and so it's perfect for my purposes. But also the really heavily cut hedges and the monoculture that you can see in this landscape, and also this plantation, which is a single species, tiny little block of woodland. And what I did is I have a friend, Jerome, and he's a Dutchman and he's an ecologist. But he's also an artist. So I worked with him over the last winter, and put together a sort of Lawton-esque scenario. And I hope Sir John doesn't mind me referring to him in this particular instance. But anyway, I think it sort of feels like what I keep on hearing from him. If we can just first of all think about in this landscape, we've got a couple of areas, perhaps in the background, maybe an MOD site over here, maybe an SSSI, maybe a rewilding project like Knepp, whatever it is. It's a high nature worth area. So I'm going to ignore those areas because they're just in the landscape now. So it's just, it's an NNR, it's an SSSI, whatever it is, MOD, whatever it is. So they're in the background. And part of this whole thing of the Lawton corridor, or I don't know, are we going to call them climate corridors, whatever they're going to be? This was just painting that corridor into that landscape. What does it look like? How do you manage it? And Jerome put in a huge herd of bison that seems to stretch for miles away. So he's got his bison coming in here. You can already see a problem. One of the interesting bits of work that Rewilding Britain has been doing and looking at these climate corridors, I think we're not calling them that anymore, but anyway, was that the climate zones that we have in this part of the world are moving at about 5 kilometers north a year. And that sort of really interested me because we've got extraordinary bit of research being done by we call her Betty Bee Bucket, because I can never remember her surname. But Betty has taken bees from Northumberland and put them in buckets and brought them down to Knepp, and they've added a whole new life cycle into their life cycle. Anyway, that's to do with climate change, and that research is looking at temperature changes. This has not happened as fast as this, I've been told. For nearly ever in terms of human timescales. One of the interesting there's a bit of a anyway. I'm just going to go through the Paris Agreement was to keep our climate below the 1.5 degree change. And this is an interesting little figure that I came across, and species range loss with no dispersal. So they haven't had the John Lawton effect. And then you have had it here. So they're still saying that we are going to lose 23% of our species in Britain, and less if we actually allow them to move around the landscape. At 2 degrees, that's what it looks like. At 3.2 degrees, which is what the present trajectory is, we're going to lose 45% of our species in this model. 15% less if we reconnect. And at 4.5 degrees, I hope we never get there by 2050, but that it looks like that. So these climate corridors, I think, or whatever we're going to call them, are going to be a really important part of our future. But we have got this problem here, haven't we? And so we've got to rejoin this landscape up, and we've got to actually spend the money on putting in green bridges. And here's a couple of green bridges, and there's some people on a bicycle and horses and so on. Those green bridges obviously been built all over the world. I think that Britain has got 2.5. I think the half is one of them really isn't functioning very well, but we've got 2.5 of them. And I think one of the things we're going to have to do is spend lots more money on that. But also the corridors, which are the hedgerows. This is a 14-metre wide hedgerow at Knepp, and it's got dormice in it, and it's got 3 nightingale territories in it. Farming for nature, nectar margins, sacrificial crops, bare earth strips. We know this works. We have got scientific studies done on it. So people like Matt Hurd, who sits on the advisory board for Knepp, was part of the team here looking at that whole question. And that's been really quite instrumental. This bit of work has been instrumental in convincing people that they should spend or give more space for nature within their farming systems. Then we've got the real revolution, the regenerative farming, the conservation farming, whatever you want to call it. And that has taken hold the whole world over. And I think if you haven't read anything about this, then the obvious books are The Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown, but also the David Montgomery, he puts it into perspective, certainly in North America. And then Charlie Massey's book, The Call of the Rewarbler from Australia, with 26 different studies. Regenerative agriculture is probably the most important revolution going on in how we're going to produce our foods and build our soils and have sustainability in our soils. I've put my wood pasture and mob grazing in here because I think it's also quite an interesting idea. There is a possibility of up to £409 a hectare for 10 years to create wood pasture from countryside stewardship schemes. And the wood pasture system for us has certainly worked because it is very much a net-based model. But on one thing I'd just like to highlight is some of the areas. This is a heat map of Gatesdale up in the Peak District. And this is a whole lot of cattle that have got collars on them, and they are controlled within that area by these collars, which you just draw a polygon with on Google Earth, as it were, and then that's your invisible fence and your no fence. And then you can get these. And this is the Epping Forest version. So here's the unit, and they can keep those animals in areas or out of areas they don't want the animals to go in. So that's going to be a really interesting way to add to this whole complex picture of how we
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, Charlie. Cheers.
Thank you. Then water, and we know the restoration of water is absolutely key. And here's I got him to put in a lynx and a beaver, and then you've got your myriad of stuff going on. Knepp has had a 2.5 kilometre long stretch of its river system being rewilded. And that has meant that life has started to pour back into that system. Where more food is going to come from is, I've got in here greenhouses, but precision fermentation, precision biology and fire farming and all those things I think are going to come our way. Also, I think we need to spend money on the cultural landscapes of the past as well, these wildflower meadow systems and so on. So this is beginning to feel to me very exciting, this landscape, and I'm just going to push through a little bit quick. But one of the things for me, for this new 30,000 hectares a year for the next 5 years, whatever it is, that Boris announced yesterday, for me, the first establishment of, if it's going to be woodland, then we need to establish that through natural regeneration. We're not talking about within existing woodscapes, but new woodscapes. I think that needs to be done, and continuous canopy forestry probably another important part of that that whole equation. I'm going to skip that. You also need to keep on thinking about how you continue reconnecting this landscape, because you will make mistakes, but you can see that you can start to really feel that this landscape is coming alive. So the announcement yesterday and this morning, I picked this up from the Opinions UK Policies and Politics and Policy, and the headline for me there was number 9, and that 30,000 football pitches worth of countryside, and I think he meant per year, I'm hoping, but maybe it wasn't per year. That 25,000 hectares going back to nature is certainly something that I look forward to seeing in our landscape. Thank you very much, everyone. This is a little ending with a redback shrike at Knepp, which I was filming as it was catching dragonflies and so on. Anyway, I'm going to come out of my shared screen and see if that's all worked.
Fantastic. No, that was. You must have so many stories you could tell. I would imagine you could go on forever saying how that's all worked.
Neil, yes.
Thank you very much. Got a couple of questions come in. One was there a baseline monitoring framework set up before rewilding started, or did you use data already in record centres and other sources? So really around the sort of the monitoring.
Yeah, and we did, it was really difficult because we were asking Natural England, who were our partners basically, what monitoring should we do? And they said, you need to do it. And they said, well, what? And then they said, well, you need to do it, and you need to show that, And so we put in place transects, for instance. We did a baseline. Did the baseline work? So the basic baseline, is it called phase 1 survey? And then we put in these transects, but we didn't know quite where. For instance, we put in these bird survey transects, which were along footpaths, and one of them follows a green lane, and the green lane's very, it's got lots of trees going along the edge of it, and it really hasn't changed much at all. So we made mistakes. Now, with what we know, we are absolutely helping others who are doing this similar type of thing to not make the same mistakes. And so I think it will be better in the future. But certainly we have tried our very best to capture, as time goes along, what's happened. Okay,
thank you. I mean, there are lots of questions coming in now, so we'll try and do a couple more, and maybe you'd be able to answer some of them offline at some point. Curious about the use of lead shot in the context of rewilding ecosystems. Do you use lead at Knepp?
No, we moved over to copper. I don't know, a lot of you will know Jonathan Spencer, and he's been on at me. He's one of people on the advisory board, and he's been on at me for forever. As he was going through that whole process of getting Forestry Commission to move from lead to copper. And we moved over to copper because of Jonathan, really, but for perfectly good reasons as well. We used to have a gamekeeper and we used to have a chute, but we don't anymore, and we would have been using lead shot for that. We've also got a clay pigeon club, and so that had been pouring lead into certain bits of the fields in certain areas, but we've also stopped that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. There's lots of comments coming in about what fantastic and inspirational talk and projects. So take those as read, Charlie, but don't. There was one, do your neighbour farms see a benefit from Knepp as a reservoir for beneficial species?
We don't really know. I mean, what's happened to nightingale population is it's certainly growing locally. So we think there's a ripple effect for that, but it's so hard to tell. You guys would be a better place to tell me how to do that. But we have obviously, Penny used to run the record centre for Sussex, and so that's our ecologist, and so she's well placed to know what the background data is on all the species, and she's very much in touch with everyone still. So I think it's anecdotal and nothing we can point our finger at. We are a hotspot for turtle dove, and certainly there's a growing population of turtle doves at Knepp, and that seems to be having a positive effect on the landscape around us.
Yeah. I'm going to push the boundary. Might slip over time, but just one final question. And again, this is probably one you could talk for some time about. Could you talk a little more about your recommendations for ecologically intensive food production? I'll only give you a minute or two, I'm afraid, though.
I mean, are you talking about the human food chain, or are you talking about the numbers of insects that are being produced?
It doesn't say here, and we probably can't. I don't know if Tali can come. We're allowed to get people off mute. I think it's probably human.
So we produce from the site about 75 tons live weight, so about 35 tons of meat, and that goes into the human food chain, if that's what you're talking about. But I mean, what astonishes me always is the insect food chain. I mean, the bird numbers that we're seeing and how that, what's that being fed by? It's just astonishing what happens to those soils and the recovery of it.
Yeah. I mean, those numbers you quoted of the sort of just the 623 black caps and things like that, it is amazing, staggering, isn't it? Over, relatively short period in the
it is a short period. Yeah.